The glass shattered before the insult landed. Jessica's martini, cold and stinging with gin, sprayed across Margaret's face and pearls, dripping onto the polished oak table between them. For a breath, the room was still, holding the sound of ice cubes skittering across porcelain. Mark froze, halfway out of his chair, staring at his mother with wide, guilty eyes. It wasn't the drink that shocked Margaret, it was the word Jessica had hurled with it. Selfish. The scene burned into Margaret's mind like a brand, but this was not where her story began. 3 weeks earlier, Margaret Thompson had been standing under the humming fluorescent lights of Murphy's Corner store, pressing a lottery ticket against the counter as if her life depended on it. The clerk had double-checked the numbers, his face shifting from boredom to disbelief. "Ma'am, you just won $2 million. At 67, after decades of teaching third graders and clipping coupons to make ends meet, the universe had handed her something she'd never dared to dream of: abundance. She walked out of the store trembling, clutching the slip of paper like it was a fragile miracle. The first call she made was to her son. Mark's voice, warm and boyish even at 42, had spilled through the phone. "Mom, that's incredible." In the background, she heard Jessica's high-pitched squeal, followed quickly by, "We have to celebrate." Margaret had nearly wept with relief. For years, she'd felt the slow chill in her relationship with Mark, Jessica's cool disapproval of her modest house, her outdated clothes, her small-town mindset. Money, though, money changed things. Didn't it? Maybe this windfall could thaw what had been frozen between them. In the following days, Margaret kept her head steady. She met with a financial advisor, planned to pay off her mortgage, considered finally booking the trip to Ireland she'd promised herself. Sensible dreams, carefully stacked like neat columns of arithmetic. But beneath the glow of her newfound fortune, a subtle unease stirred. Mark called more often than he had in years, always asking the same questions. Was she being smart with the money? Had she considered Jessica's financial planner? Had she thought about helping family first? Margaret brushed aside the tension. She wanted to believe in their kindness. She wanted to believe this money could heal. She had no idea it would shatter everything instead. The phone calls came like clockwork. Morning check-ins, late-night texts, questions slipped in as if they were casual curiosity. "How's the advisor treating you, Mom?" Mark's voice carried warmth, but there was a thread underneath, too measured, too rehearsed. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Everything's conservative. Safe." "That's good. Jessica just thinks, if you had someone sharper, you could really grow that money. Make it work harder for you." Jessica. Always Jessica. Margaret forced a smile, even though the phone couldn't see it. "I've grown used to working hard myself. I'd like my money to rest a little." Mark chuckled, but it sounded tight. "Fair enough, Mom. Just, remember you've got family who loves you. Family should share in good fortune." That word, share, lingered long after the call ended. In the quiet of her kitchen, Margaret folded laundry and tried not to replay the memory of her son's tone, the same coaxing voice he'd used at 16 when asking to borrow her car keys. Back then, she'd said yes. Too often. Still, hope tugged at her. She wanted to believe this time was different. She wanted to believe the money wasn't a wall but a bridge. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday evening, dinner. Saturday. Our treat. When Margaret opened the door that night, the air between her and Jessica was unusually warm. Her daughter-in-law even offered a quick hug, the scent of expensive perfume clinging as though to mask something sharper beneath. Mark carried roses and grocery bags, while Jessica held a sleek leather case that looked absurd for a family gathering. "You look lovely, Margaret," Jessica said, her voice syrupy smooth. "This house has so much charm." Charm. A word Jessica had never once applied to the home Margaret had spent 30 years paying off, one frugal dollar at a time. The compliment should have felt like grace. Instead, it rang like a bell warning of something ahead. Still, Margaret smoothed her new navy dress and told herself not to question kindness. Not tonight. Not when her son was smiling at her with a boyish pride she hadn't seen in years. The table was set, candles flickering. French food gleamed from silver containers. Wine sparkled in crystal glasses. It was perfect. Almost too perfect. Margaret raised her glass, trying to quiet the unease whispering at the edge of her happiness. She wanted to believe this was celebration. She needed to. But in the shadows between flickering candles, she caught the first glance Jessica and Mark exchanged, quick, coordinated, dangerous. The game had begun. The first hint came not in words, but in paper. Jessica slid the leather case onto the table as dessert plates were cleared away. She clicked it open with a snap that seemed louder than the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Out came a folder, thick as a phone book, the edges creased from too much handling. "This is something we wanted to talk about tonight," Mark began, his voice dipping into the careful register he used when bracing for resistance. Margaret's stomach tightened. "Talk about what?" Jessica nudged the folder toward her. Even upside down, Margaret saw the numbers. Rows upon rows of them, climbing down the page like an avalanche. She turned the first sheet around. $847,000. Her breath caught. "This is debt?" Jessica leaned forward, eyes bright, tone smooth. "Temporary setbacks. Investments, really. But you understand, Margaret, sometimes it takes bold moves to build a future." Margaret flipped through the pages, each one heavier than the last. Louis Vuitton, BMW, Four Seasons. Not investments, indulgences. Luxuries she'd never allowed herself even once. "You want me to pay this?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Not pay," Mark corrected, sliding his hand over hers. "Help. Mom, you have $2 million. Jessica just needs a chance to get back on her feet. You'd still have more than enough." The word echoed like a hammer on iron, enough. Enough for her age. Enough for her small life. Enough for a woman who had survived on $30,000 a year. Margaret's pulse thudded. She looked from her son's earnest eyes to Jessica's sharp, expectant ones and felt the floor tilt beneath her. This wasn't celebration. This wasn't family gathering around to cheer her good fortune. This was a negotiation staged like a dinner party. She had been a teacher long enough to recognize rehearsed lines, practiced glances, coordinated attacks. And in that moment, candles flickering, roses perfuming the air, her pearls catching drops of wine, Margaret saw her position clearly. She wasn't the guest of honor. She was the mark. Her fork clattered against the china as she set it down. "What happens," she asked quietly, "if I say no?" The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. And Margaret understood, the true cost of her lottery win had just arrived. Margaret set the papers down with deliberate care, as if the weight of them might splinter her table. $847,000, she said softly. "Nearly half my winnings. And you expect me to hand it over?" Jessica's smile was quick, too polished. "Not expect, Margaret. Trust. Family helps family. You raised Mark to believe that, didn't you?" The phrase struck like a weapon wielded back against her. Family helps family. She'd whispered it into Mark's ear when he was small, when she patched his knees and stretched dinners to cover two hungry mouths. Now it was being used as leverage. Mark leaned in, his eyes pleading. "Mom, think about it. You'll still have security. Social security, the house, the investments. We're not asking you to give everything up. Just enough to stop these debts from swallowing Jessica's career. Without your help," his voice faltered. "My clearance could be at risk. If her credit collapses, so does my job." There it was, the trap closing. Not just Jessica's problem, but his livelihood. His future. Margaret's chest tightened. For a fleeting moment, she imagined handing them a check. Watching relief wash over her son's face. Restoring the closeness she craved. But another image intruded, Jessica at the Four Seasons, sipping champagne bought on borrowed money. Jessica with designer bags piled high, while Margaret sat at home turning off lights to keep the electric bill low. Her throat burned. "And what about me?" she asked, her voice sharper now. "What happens when I need care? When the money's gone and I'm too old to earn it back? Do I become your burden then, too?" Jessica's eyes flashed. "You don't need that much, Margaret. You live, simply. You'll never spend it all." Margaret caught the word. Simply. The way Jessica said it, it wasn't simplicity. It was smallness. Insignificance. The room seemed to shrink. The roses on the table suddenly reeked. The candle flames threw long, uneasy shadows across the walls. She looked at her son, searching for him beneath Jessica's influence, searching for the boy who once brought her wildflowers in a jelly jar after recess. But all she found was silence, and the weight of his expectation pressing down on her. Margaret folded her hands, forcing calm into her voice. "So if I say no, what happens to us then?" The pause that followed told her everything. They hadn't come here for family. They'd come for her fortune. And the mask was seconds from slipping. The silence snapped first. Jessica pushed back her chair, the scrape sharp as a blade, and rose with the martini glass in hand. "You sit there dripping in pearls, holding $2 million, and call me reckless?" Her voice sliced through the candlelight. Margaret didn't flinch. "I call it truth." The glass tipped. Cold gin splashed across Margaret's face, running down her dress, pooling at her collarbone. Olive brine stung her eyes, but it was the word Jessica hissed that cut deeper. Selfish. For a moment, Margaret couldn't breathe. She wiped her cheeks with the corner of her napkin, steady hands belying the storm inside. Across the table, Mark's face had gone pale, caught between horror and loyalty he couldn't untangle. Something inside Margaret, something quiet and long suffocated, rose to the surface. She stood slowly, the damp fabric of her dress clinging to her knees, and when she spoke, her voice carried the calm authority of 30 years commanding classrooms. "Sit down." The command was so precise, so sharp, that both Mark and Jessica obeyed without thought. Two adults reduced to chastened children in an instant. Margaret lifted the folder from the table and let the pages fan out in her hands. Nordstrom. Louis Vuitton. Four Seasons. A BMW you can't afford to park in your own driveway. Do you know what I bought with my salary, Jessica? Groceries. Shoes that lasted 5 years. A second-hand sofa so my son had somewhere to stretch out when he studied. Jessica opened her mouth, but Margaret cut her off with a raised hand. "You think selfishness is refusing to fund your collapse. I think selfishness is building a palace out of borrowed bricks and demanding someone else hold the walls when they fall." Her gaze locked on Mark. "And you, my son. You brought me here not to celebrate, but to bargain. You wanted me to buy back your affection. Tell me, what is the going price for a mother's love?" Mark swallowed hard, his eyes wet. He had no answer. Margaret laid the folder flat, smoothed her damp dress, and reached for her pen. From her checkbook, she wrote with deliberate strokes. $1,000. She tore the slip free, placed it in the center of the table, and slid it forward. "This," she said, "is what I can give you. The rest is mine." The room held its breath. And Margaret, for the first time in years, felt utterly free. The check lay untouched between the wine glasses, as though it were radioactive. Jessica's lips curled, her voice trembling with fury. $1,000? That won't even cover the interest. Margaret met her gaze, unblinking. "Then perhaps you should learn what interest costs." Mark reached for the check with shaking fingers, but not to take it, only to push it back toward his mother, as if touching it burned. His shoulders slumped, the boy she once knew flickering behind the man she barely recognized. "Mom, please. Don't do this." Margaret leaned forward, her damp dress cooling against her skin, her pearls sticky with gin. "I already did. The only question left is whether you'll sit at my table again because you want me, Or because you want what's in my bank account? Choose wisely. The words hung in the air, heavier than any check could be. Jessica stood, shoving the chair back so hard it nearly toppled. She gathered her folder in furious hands, her perfume cutting sharp through the room. Come on, Mark. She's made her choice. But for the first time, Margaret noticed something. Mark didn't move right away. His eyes darted between his mother and his wife, torn open by a silence too loud to bear. Go with her, Margaret said gently. You already did. When the front door slammed, the house was suddenly vast in its quiet. The roses wilted in their vase, the candles guttered low, and Margaret stood alone in the ruins of a dinner meant to honor her but staged as a heist. She collected the check, folded it once, and placed it inside her grandmother's china bowl, a small reminder of boundaries drawn in ink. Later that night, she opened her window. The cool air smelled of damp earth and lilacs from her garden. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and a train horn carried through the dark. Margaret closed her eyes. The ache of betrayal was sharp, but beneath it lived something steadier, resolve. For the first time in decades, her future belonged only to her. She whispered into the night, not for Mark, not for Jessica, but for herself. Love is not a ledger. And my life is not for sale. The words drifted out into the quiet street, carried away like a benediction or a warning. And Margaret, with the faintest smile, turned back inside to begin again.